This is the first recording of The Coatless Chef, and the topic is methods of cooking. We'll start with the fundamentals first, that it becomes easy for us to relate uh, these methods of cooking along with what we are used to. For the objective of knowledge is to move from the known to the unknown. So here is to it. We start with the wet methods. So there are basically two kinds of methods of cooking. You have the wet methods and you have the dry methods. In the wet methods, we start with boiling. So boiling, simmering, and poaching. These are the three methods of cooking which are moist. Apart from this, you have steaming, blanching, braising, and stewing. All of these can happen with pure water by itself, or they could happen with any liquid which is of the nature of water, which is a non-oily liquid. It means it could be in a stock, it could be with a juice, it could be in milk, it could be anything which is liquid, could bouillon, or you have let's say a matalot, or different kinds of stocks. Any kind of a liquid that you have can be used as a base for cooking, for any moist method of cooking. So we start with what boiling is. Now, essentially, in the wet methods of cooking, if you look at boiling, boiling happens at 100 degrees centigrade. In contrast, simmering happens at sub-boiling temperatures, which is a temperature between 85 and 96 degrees centigrade, and poaching happens even below that. It is, let's say, 71 to 82 degrees centigrade. Now, actually, the whole concept of cooking, it depends upon what is it that we wish to achieve. That determines what kind of a method that we wish to go into. Depends on what we want to do. Proteins, which is essentially, let's say, egg, fish, meat, these are generally tender and delicate. And so what happens is, when you want to cook them at higher temperatures, then they become tougher and harder. They become very strongly denatured. In contrast, when they are cooked at lower temperatures, what happens is they're more tender. So, which is why you would note that for quite a few products that we make in our Indian kitchens, let's say if you're making mutton curry, or let's say if you're making something in fish, it is not boiled at high temperatures. After the first degree of cooking, or even anything, if you're looking at continental stews or a Chinese product being cooked, if you're talking about meats and fishes in particular, they are cooked at lower temperatures for a longer time for the product to remain tender, which is a critical part of cooking any meat or fish, which implies a protein basically. But in contrast, if you have vegetables, vegetables can be boiled, and they do need to be boiled because carbohydrates are a separate lot. They require to be cooked at higher temperatures for you to be able to cook it thoroughly and through. So vegetables and carbohydrates, typically things like your rice, pasta, grains, millets, these are the ones that you tend to cook at 100 degrees and above. Now this you see without bubbles. This is probably the right poaching temperature. Rising through poaching, we're going into a simmering temperature zone now. As you know, 85 to 96 degrees, that is simmering. And when you turn on the heat a bit, the bubbles start coming on, which is what is clearly boiling. Right now, you have a rapidly boiling water over here, right? Steaming is probably the oldest method of cooking known to man, even before his contact with direct fire. The hot geysers and springs would have provided a source of steam, and so everything can be steamed, right from rice onwards, or to your steam buns, or your dumplings, and then you have a host of Indian breakfasts, starting idli and puttu and dhokla. All of these can be steamed. Even non-veg items like chicken can be steamed. Patra, which is steamed breakfast item, once again, it's colloquially used with gram flour. curried clam flour, which is rolled and steamed and then cut into pieces. That's again steam. You have patrani machi, which is a Gujarati fish preparation in which you have banana leaves with the fish inside it, along with a coconut chutney, which is steamed, which is pretty similar to machar paturi, Bengali preparation. We have other desserts also which can be steamed. Caramel custard is a classic dessert which could be steamed. Steaming is a very healthy method of cooking because there is no direct contact with oil also. It has got a lot of advantages. The temperature that can be used for steaming is, it could be 100 degrees and above also. And because of the vapor form, there is a natural aeration to it. Since there is no contact with any other cooking liquid, there is no loss of flavor. In fact, the flavors are accentuated. So one requires to be very careful about the flavors before one steams the product. So the word blanch comes from the French word blanc, and which means white. So when you blanch, you could blanch a bone, you could blanch vegetables, and the whole objective, there are 2-3 reasons to it. Number one is, when you blanch particularly a bone, you whiten it and you thereby remove some of the impurities, which makes it fit for white stock, point blanc. When you blanch vegetables, let's say if you blanch a tomato, you would typically do it to remove the skin. So you would put on a cross on top of the tomato and then put it into hot boiling water for, let's say, about 2 minutes and take it out. It will be just to firm up the vegetable, and as soon as the vegetable, whatever is blanched, the tomato or the vegetable, you would require to shock it. It is shocked in ice cold water by dipping it into ice cold water, and thereby the cooking is stopped. So this is what blanching is about. So now we would learn about braising, stewing and boiling. So of all of these, first we require to understand what is braising. Braising typically is something where it's a method of cooking wherein you have the combination of both oil and water. So typically the item being braised is seared first or browned first, or if it's a vegetable then it's not brown. And then it is partly dipped in liquid, let's say it's a stock or water and or sauce, and then it is covered with a tight-fitting liquid, tight-fitting lid, and cooked in the oven typically. So earlier we had braising pans, or we still have braising pans. The braising pans earlier, they were designed to sit on embers, and the embers would be placed on top of the braising pan as well, on top of the lid as well. So you had very amazing lids also. You had lids which were hollow. So in the hollow lid, you would have water kept inside the hollow of the lid so that it did not get extra hot, while embers when placed on top of it would help to transmit the heat evenly. Now the difference between braising and stewing, hardly any. You have only smaller pieces of meat which are related to stewing. Process remains pretty much the same. One typical difference between a stew and a braise is a stew normally is slightly thickened with starch, typically with respect to the vegetables which are already there in the stew. Now classic examples of stew would include, let's say, ossobuco, you would have Irish lamb stew, or let's say even a mangshir jhol or a machar jhol or a malai curry. All of these are, in fact, most of what the Indians consume in terms of our daily gravy preparations. These are usually stewed. More often than not, these are stewed products. So that's about braising and stewing. Boiling is different from braising by the virtue of the fact that in boiling, while there is a large joint of meat being used, there is basting with butter. Basting is application of butter on top of the meat, So basting with butter which goes on at regular intervals. So that's how boiling is different from braising as well as stewing. It would be interesting for you to note that proteins start coagulating from 38 degrees centigrade onwards. And so, along cooking methods, let's say in a sous vide method, you would have possibly a fish which is being technically poached um, in temperature of about 38 degrees centigrade or 40 degrees centigrade, sometimes 43 degrees centigrade. Of course, the cooking time is for much longer and sometimes even up to 12 hours. Strictly, you cannot call it really poaching also because it's supposed to be kept in a vacuum sealed packet, and then the whole thing is poached. The packet is poached, not the product by itself. That's something pretty interesting about a sous vide method of cooking.